much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and call this policy meeting to order. Ms. Cadetzi, if you don't mind calling our roll, please.
Miss Josie Bonhart,
Here.
Miss Pat Bradford,
I am here.
and Miss Stephanie Crabel.
Here. Thank you. Let us stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Principal Madden and Principal May. Thank you guys for being here today. And we will move on with our agenda with the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the agenda.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes. The first thing on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. So we have it before us, March 14th and April 18th.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve both sets of minutes.
I second. Yes, ma'am.
Just, I wanted to see if we wanted to, in the counseling program where it says about the first paragraph and striking out after some debate, strike the current language and replace it with provisions, if we wanted to be more clear, since there were only like 5 words that we were striking. I'm sorry, 418. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at these, so I'm trying to look at them now because they weren't posted for me while I was gone. So that one, the words in there, striking out social emotional learning and striking and changing the definition of the word equity to fair and consistent. I didn't know if we wanted to call those out, so if anybody was reading our minutes, they would know what we were talking about.
Bradford, do you have any input on that? I made a motion to approve the minutes, and I think it's been seconded. I am fine with how they read now, so.
All right, can we hold for just a minute so that
Yes, ma'am.
or approve one at a time? Because I really do want to glance down.
Let's give everyone 3 minutes to look over these
Thank you.
meeting
I
minutes.
appreciate
Thank you.
that.
You're welcome.
If you guys have read them, then I'm good.
Yes, ma'am.
With the minutes for 314, we did talk about, and in the policy 3610, and we did talk about those words. So I think it would be consistent for the minutes from 418 meeting to kind of jive with the minutes from the 314 meeting, because we talked about the same policy and we talked about the same words. So I would like to insert the words that we had in 314 into the minutes from 418.
Let me just look so I'm on the same page of what you're saying.
In our minutes from 418, when we were talking about policy 3610
Yeah.
on counseling, it just said that after some debate, makes a motion to strike current language and replace it with suggested revisions and forward it to the board. So my suggestion there was to strike the current language and call out specifically removing social emotional learning from the definition of what counselors do and replacing the word equity with fair and consistent. And I was thinking about that, and then now that I've just read the minutes for 314, we did talk about it, and it was outlined pretty specifically.
And Ms. Bradford, if we're looking at page 16, just so that we're all on the same page is what I'm trying to get at. Page 16
Oh, I'm
is
sorry.
where the March 14th, and then comparing to the April 18th.
Again, I think we're splitting hairs. It's in the minutes. I see no reason to change it.
The wording is not in the minutes. That's what I'm asking to insert into the minutes.
I'm fine with the minutes the way they are. Ms. Bradford, any other comments?
No.
Okay, so for all in favor of passing both minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Those
Opposed.
minutes pass 2-1. So moving into our first policy, Policy 2230, Board Committee Meetings, excuse me. And so there's two parts to this. The first, we'll dive into the Board Committee assignments, and that's 2230. And I had made a note to discuss both the Legislative Committee as well as the CTE Advisory Council. So jumping into Legislative Committee, you can see.
Ms. Barnhart?
Yes, ma'am.
Legislative committee is not on the agenda.
Will you scroll down to?
Are you putting it in, you're making it as part of the 2230?
It's on, if you look at the 2230 discussion, which is where we're at, it is, yeah, actually it is. In addition, it says, the policy committee will discuss changes made in legislative committee section as well as CTE Business Advisory Council section. So you can see on page 22 of our packet, I have in red, the legislative committee would be responsible for creating a legislative agenda to be approved by the board, following our strategic plan and getting guidance and input from our central office. And I'll even insert, in staff, so that there's a collective vision to advocate for our elected officials on behalf of New Hanover County Schools. So the only change is if you insert right after central office and staff in there. And that was something that we discussed last time, but Ms. Cribble, you asked to see it in writing.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Ms. Bradford, is there any other suggestions or comments on
Just
that?
semantics and words.
Okay.
All the other policies refer to the strategic plan, the central office. So if it doesn't bother anybody that it uses the word, that uses our, I would change the 2 hours to the.
So
But
the
it's just,
strategic plan
it's not,
and-
it's not a hill to die on.
Okay, I'm fine with changing R to the.
Yeah.
And the only other clarifying is that sentence before, it says one board member on this committee will also serve as the board's liaison to the NCSBA per policy 2650, liaison with School Boards Association, and follow NCSBA legislative and other activity and report highlights to the entire board. I looked over policy 2650, and it does not say that we have to have a legislative liaison. So if Jason's on the call, I'd love to get his guidance on that and verify that I'm interpreting that correctly, because it's my understanding that as elected officials, we are all supposed to be keeping and maintaining. I know that I'm signed up for a whole bunch of things, and I think everybody on this board gets those same emails for NCSBA updates.
And that's correct. The board has discretion. You're not required to have a legislative committee at all. So the standing committees are all at your discretion, and if the board wants to appoint a particular individual to serve as a liaison, you can do that. You could also remove it. It's completely at your discretion.
Okay. Then I would make a motion to strike that sentence from the policy. One board member on this committee will serve as the liaison.
So it starts with one board member and goes all the way to board?
Correct. So one board member, striking this sentence, one board member on this committee will also serve as the board's liaison to the NCSBA per policy 2650, liaison with School Boards Association, and follow the NCSBA legislative and other activity and report highlights to the entire board. As I discussed last time, I feel like this is kind of backwards. The legislative committee for New Hanover County Schools, I believe, should be reflective of our needs, and then we are advocating that to a higher level.
I second that.
Any other discussion with that? All in favor? Oh, yes, ma'am.
I am just having a little bit of a fundamental problem with that, is that the board is instructing the superintendent, but he is not necessarily a member of the School Board Association. We are. And he and his staff do keep us up to date. But that has been in there for a long time, so that someone from our board takes it upon themselves to attend these meetings and really follow up, because in the past, we have not done that. Everybody gets the messages and nobody does anything with them. So I just think it's in our board's best interest for someone from the board to be appointed as that, like in an advisory role, that, and the best place to have them would be on the legislative committee, because that's what we're doing. But the NCSBA, maybe it doesn't have to be in legislative, but they don't just advise us on legislation, they advise us on best practices. So maybe we say that it's the board chair's responsibility about that. But before we strike it out, I would like to hear from the whole board on that, because we have been derelict in that. And the person that was assigned never brought us anything, and in previous years to that, no one ever paid attention to things that were coming up, like best practices and, that kind of stuff. And also, too, when we get to the annual meeting in November, we have 4 delegates that are assigned to go and vote on the NCSBA legislative agenda. And we have not been consistent, across the years in sending somebody. So our vote doesn't even get entered. So I've been doing that for the past 2 years, and then Walker did it the year before me, so that we had a chance to have our voice recorded with the other districts across the state. So I think it's important that we have somebody that we can count on to do that for us.
I mean, where my hesitation is of pushback is we are all supposed to be in communication, and so to put one person as basically the spokesperson for the NCSBA is what I feel like this is reading as, and I don't think that's right. I actually attended a seminar yesterday that they held, and so it's one of those things that this is part of our responsibility as members of the board. It's not one person, and so where I feel this legislative committee can be very powerful and impactful for our schools is starting local and expanding. And I've already been familiarized with, we have a couple of different legislative agendas just in our local community that once we establish it for New Hanover County Schools, we can go to those local entities and say, these are the things that we're advocating for. So we can be a power in numbers with that versus, it's just a different approach. The NCSBA represents a whole bunch of different districts. They are not necessarily going to have some of our similar concerns, like even when I asked Dr. Faust and Dr. Faison about, tell me what you're going to do to fix our priority schools, and they said, well, this is the plan. That's unique to us. And so it's just a different way to approach this. I would rather the whole board be on the hook, if you will, to be representative and to be a part of NCSBA versus one person and seeming, the go-between with that. So, and with regard to what you're saying, this will come before the board. And so if this is not something that the board wants, then it will stay in policy. Just like when we had a discussion last time, I discussed having more than 3 members. You guys said no, so it stayed 3 board members. So this is the point of having this discussion. I'm just telling you where it's coming from on my end. So with that, Ms. Bradford, are you still in favor of striking that? Okay.
Yes,
so I'm going to make a motion to strike, well, I already did, to strike that and to adopt the red language that we had added.
Madam Chair, there's some red on 2 pages over on page 24.
Oh, yeah, yes. So the CTE Business Advisory Council, so that is on page 24 of our packet, thank you. And it said the council will have at least 11, and I'm suggesting we cross that out to make it 15, and then to add at least one board member, but up to 3. And my justification in discussing this is we have a huge plan to expand our career and technical education program, I believe by 40%. And so I'd like to see more board members represented so we can better advocate for the different people in our community to bring in new members, to amplify, and to really help bolster this program. And so that's where my justification of that wording is. And the reason of the 15 and up to 3, there's some legal standing as far as what the committee makeup with CTE Business Advisory Council looks like. But that's where it's coming from. And so right now, we would not be in violation of this policy because we do have 1 board member assigned, but this would allow the chair to assign up to 3 board members for it. Sounds good.
So again, as we've discussed at this meeting and in an email that I sent to you, I don't think it's appropriate for us to change the wording on the CTE Business Advisory Council without hearing from Dr. Fason's department, and explicitly Katrina Futrell, who is in charge of that department. So we do not know
Dr. Faison, do you mind speaking to that?
Thank you. I actually am reviewing this, spoke with Mrs. Futrell, and she has no objections. She is checking to make sure that this is aligned with Perkins. So we don't think it will be an issue, but we just want to make sure we're following the guidelines with Perkins. So as far as we're concerned, is whatever the board, at the board's pleasure, as long as it falls in line with Perkins. And she is checking on that, and I should know if that has an issue. We don't think so. We just want to be sure.
And I'll add, in the discussion, I believe with Mr. Weber, we talked about that there needs to be more business representation than education representation. So that would be the only thing looking on here, is making sure that we have the appropriate number of members that are not education related. And I think that's what you're discussing as well. So with that, I'm fine with moving with the changes that we've discussed, moving this policy to our June board meeting. And so I make a motion to do that.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
yes, opposed.
Okay, so I'm going to write down those changes under the column, the existing changes with amendments, and I can have under Attorney Jason Weber and/or the district SMN. So that is policy 2230. It's going to go in the top right column. And that brings us to the Universal Committee application. So again, we discussed this last time. We had some great feedback. Looking at this, I think there's some small changes to be made that we can make better. One of my suggestions would be if underneath, do you have children in the New Hanover County Schools? We can have a little checklist to say check all that apply and have a pre-K box, a K through 5 box, a 6 through 12 box, and a 9 through 12 box in the left column. And then that empty space on the right, right after we have, do you work for Central New Hanover County Schools system? Yes, no, other. And then we can have a space in what capacity and allow individuals to fill that in.
So I don't understand what other is. It's, you either work for us or you don't. So who's another?
Be a vendor.
This was feedback from our discussion last time. We can, a vendor?
No, I think it was, do you work for the system, yes or no? This other just showed up, and I didn't know what other was.
Do you want to take that off?
I think that's confusing, unless you're going to describe who the other is. Because if you technically
says right-
working for us, you're a contractor, then that would just be, do you have children in the school system? Because they're not our employees. They contract with us, and maybe that's a semantic, Jason, but if we're going to say other, then we should define what other is.
Look, Ms. Barnhart, didn't
Well-
you just propose that we have underneath that to describe how they do work for the school system? I thought that was pretty self-explanatory.
She's just saying whether or not we should take out other. Jason, you want to chime? Sorry, Jason, would you like to chime in?
Sure. I guess it depends on the intent. Was this intended to identify employees? Like, does work for mean employees only?
No,
That's what
Okay,
I
so
thought
it's
it meant.
intended to be more broad. Employees, contractors. I mean, if you want clarity, you could ask, I know you're limited with how much text you can put in here. I mean, you could say, are you an employee or contractor of the new Hanover County school system?
Well, then I think that we should put in the word volunteer, because you don't have to have, I think we need to be a little clearer in the other, because volunteers, they work for New Hanover County School System, but they don't get paid by New Hanover County School System. So maybe the work part.
That's a good suggestion. You could say, do you work or volunteer for the New Hanover County School System? Yes, no, other, the line underneath, in what capacity? So then you would say, I volunteer for this, or I'm a vendor, I cut the grass, or, I work on the roof.
Then I would like the word contract to be, do you work, contract, or volunteer? Because I think we need to be specific.
Right,
I would-
and
I would agree
work
with
is pretty broad, so
It
your
is.
goal is to capture employees, contractors, and volunteers. You could just reframe it to, are you an employee, contractor, or volunteer of the New Hanover County School System? And just leave your yes, no boxes and delete other.
So to recap, we'll change it to, are you an employee, contract, or volunteer for the New Hanover County School System? Yes, no, and then we can leave a line, in what capacity? So then, ladies, the question comes, this first box, do you think it's necessary to have, are you a teacher? With the,
Yeah.
Well, because if you, I like the information we would be gathering, at what level, so that we make sure that we don't have all pre-K kids, pre-K parents on a committee, for example. So that may be, take out that box, and in what capacity, then we could move that down to a different box.
From the same standpoint, are you a teacher? You wouldn't want all middle school teachers, or you wouldn't want all high school teachers.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's what I was
yeah,
saying.
so I have no problem leaving it. It's interesting that central office is there under teacher. How many teachers do we have in central office?
Lead teachers,
Oh, okay.
supervisors.
So can I bring this back
Yes.
in? So when I think of employees, I think of them all. I don't want us to get into singling out. So
Oh.
you may have one that say, well, I'm a bus driver. Why didn't they put my title under?
Okay.
And so or I'm whatever. So if we were just to ask, are you employed by New Hanover County, or are you employed by New Hanover County Schools? Yes, no, other. Then they could put in there what it is. If you wanted to capture all of the information,
have a line after other.
right?
Okay.
And that way it would just.
That would work too.
I just don't want us to. I know your intent is not just to favor one position, but some may look at it as they would think they're not as important as
Good point.
the other.
So, ladies, would you be fine if we struck the top, are you a teacher, yes, no? If we struck that.
Sure.
But kept the boxes, elementary, middle, high, and I would change this to district level, because when you talk about instructional coaches and stuff, they might be going from school to school. When we move it down to in what capacity, so that we have the option to show that to us.
Not sure what you're saying. You're saying strike the teacher part, but keep the elementary, middle, high,
Yeah,
and
why would
central
you do that
office.
if you're striking?
In what
That's when if
capacity? Like, so if we moved it down to the bottom, I'm just saying.
Oh, I
so
see what you're
rather-
saying.
So just like what Dr. Faust is saying, not singling out, we only care
Okay.
about teacher input, but to have the option, so for those individuals who are working at an elementary, middle school, and maybe as well, to add that, and then my only other notes, I feel like the board advisory committee and board standing committee just needs to be bolded, and we can lose those boxes.
All right, so I'm still back up at the top. When we say, are you employed? So a volunteer is not employed.
But are you employed, contracted, or volunteer for the New Hanover County School System?
And is a vendor anybody that we sign a contract with? I mean, I'm just wondering, like somebody that we purchase something with, or somebody that actually builds us. So do we want to use vendor? It doesn't matter, Mr. Weber?
Well, you're in a contract with the
No,
vendor.
I mean, those are interchangeable terms.
Okay.
To add or not add vendor, is that what we landed on?
No, I just
Contract
wanted to make sure that
Contract.
we understood what contractor meant. Because a lot of people, when you say contractor, they're thinking of construction and not necessarily, or contracted services like our mental health. But they don't necessarily think about the people that supply our vending machines. With stuff, and all the little nuances that we get services from.
Okay, ladies, with that, moving on to the bottom half of this section, are there any other suggestions that you have for this application?
Yeah, my suggestion last time was, I'm glad we have the boxes, but my suggestion last time was to make these columns line up with the kind of committee they are. So under Board Advisory Committee, we would have Advisory Council for Exceptional Children, CTE Business Advisory, Gifted Advisory, Ad Hoc, the Calendar Committee, and School Health Advisory Council. So I think my point was, in making that, is we need to delineate between an advisory council and a board committee, because that's how it's laid out in our policy. And then they should be listed alphabetically within their own subcategory. So under board standing committees, the only ones we have are Equity, Title IX, Educator of the Year is not a board committee, that's an advisory committee. So those are the only ones that we have that are and the finance committee, is, well, we don't have anybody on there, never mind, for that one. And we don't have anybody for legislative, we don't have the public in those. So that would,
That'd be fine. I mean, it does help for people who are really organized, they like alphabetical, and it tells them where it belongs, so yeah, it works for me.
I agree. Ms. Kadetsky, if she could make those changes that we've talked about, and then we can bring this forward to the June board meeting, and I would.
Okay. I just think that this is a lot of changes. I think that maybe if we can request that she sends it out to us to look at and provide individual comments, back to her, like not all three of us hitting reply all, but, because there's a lot of little nuancy things so that everybody can kind of,
Yeah, and if
Take a peek.
if we have it by the agenda review, then I know we'll have a couple other comments from some of the other board members. I mean, creating a form, everybody wants to contribute, so.
or at
if we
least
could-
see it
We could talk about it at the agenda
without us
review.
changing it around, yeah.
And committee members, if I can make a recommendation, right above the signature line, there's a line that says, I would agree to terms and policies. I recommend striking would. I mean, they should just be agreeing.
Good.
And I don't know how often, committees set their own policies, but you might want to change that to say terms, policies, and expectations set forth by the committee, just so it's broad, depending on how the committee communicates what its expectations are.
Sure.
I'm fine with adding that.
Well, so along those lines then, would we not want to take out policies because they're going to have to follow the policies, but I'm thinking it might be confusing that these board committees and advisory committees think they're setting policy and they're not. Even board committees do not set policy, so I would, Jason.
And you could just put strike terms and policies, replace it with expectations. Your board committee's policy down in section E establishes board committee expectations. That's the term it uses. So you could just use that term again here.
That would work.
So one last question, when we have down here the meets, are we going to just leave that blank and have the person have to guess? Or is it our expectation that we would fill these in because each committee meets differently? So I don't know that we want to have that on an application form unless the committee has already, because we're going to have to change this again after these committees get back together and decide when they meet. because like we've already had some committees that are changing what appeared to be a regular meeting time. And so every time we change what the committee wants to do, we'd have to change the meets. So,
So you could maybe make a note, an asterisk that says, to see when this committee meets, go to this place.
yeah, because we do have a document that we've tried to keep up on, but that's what got me looking at this, 2 years ago, was that all of our documents didn't match. So that would be something that, we could work with our board clerk to keep that document together, and then we post it on our website under key documents, sort of section. So, but I think each committee, at least since this is all new, each committee should have that opportunity to do that at the beginning of the school year, and then we can, refresh as needed. So I would recommend taking out the meets off of the policy.
Yeah, and just make a note.
Off of the universal application.
Just put a note somewhere to where to find them. Because it seems to me if you wanted to volunteer for a committee, you'd need to know what day it met and what time, even if it changed in the future, but before you signed up, you'd want to know what day it met. So that
So
makes
to
sense.
have an asterisk to say,
Yeah.
to see a full list of meeting times, go to, and then have the link for that.
Meeting dates and times, yeah.
So Josh, what would you recommend that to be? Like just,
My recommendation would be whatever we put on the form, it points to the website where
Yeah.
it will be most up to date. I'd hate to create a form and then that change and not change dynamically on the
I hear
website.
you, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, just on board documents, on the New Hanover County Board of Education document section or something like that.
Okay, and we can make those changes, and I'm going to put this again over in the top right column, and prior to the agenda review, if we have it ready to go, that we can discuss for the June meeting. So just scratching out the meets, changing the verbiage that Jason said, and adding to see a full list of the meeting dates and times, having a link to where we can go to do that.
So this is not a separate policy. Is this, are we trying to make this a separate policy, or are we trying to do this to meet the expectation of 2230 letter E?
I would say the latter.
Okay, so then maybe that's where we make a note of that somewhere in the board committee expectations. Well, I think we already have. Recruit and maintain a diverse committee membership using a common membership application. And
Yeah, just finally creating one.
yeah, and so let's call it the same thing. Instead of common, you call it universal. And universal committee application, so that it matches with the title of our document. Number 5 in E.
Yeah, instead of common, it'd be universal, right?
Universal committee application.
Yeah, so take out common membership and add universal committee.
Yes.
So for those following along, we're on page 26, using a universal committee application and recruiting time window. So that will be included with the changes that we're sending to the board.
Cool.
That we need to make with policy 2230, excuse me. So moving on, we are coming up to this short-term suspensions, policy 4351. Ms. Bradford and I know we had a conversation about that, so if you want to lead the discussion on this, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Madam Chair, if you look down I'm not saying we not discuss this, but if you look down in the substantive changes section, we talk about 4,300 in there, and 4,300 references 4351. So I just wanted some feedback from Ms. Varnum on is there an order in which you would prefer that we discuss these, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves by looking at policy 4351 when 4,300 may or may not have changes to it? No?
I think we can circle back to anything that needs to be discussed.
Okay.
Okay, with that, Ms. Bradford?
Thank you.
Page 30, C, 5. I've heard the parents and the public outcry about this, and they make sense. I know that if a kid gets called into the office to have a chat, they don't need the parent or the guardian there. But if they are under C, student rights during suspension, a big fat word suspension there. A parent or guardian should be there. I'm sorry, if you called me into the office for suspension, I'd want somebody with me, probably a lawyer. But, you know, to think that a child could do that on their own if they're under 18, it just doesn't work for me. They need that wisdom of a parent or guardian. So I'd like to see that added. But I'm not saying every time they get, you know, a hall pass violation. I'm not saying that, but it seems to me that in this policy, it says student rights during the suspension. So I would like to see that 5. I don't think that came from me, but I like it.
And that, maybe the language would be changed, but so what you're trying to get across is to understand that if in the event of a suspension or a student about to be suspended, that the parent is there and aware of the process. And so Dr. Faust, do you want to chime in to talk about the process, to understand that hopefully we're not just kicking kids out, that, but yes, if you want to speak to that.
I could almost say pre-K, K, elementary, and middle, and let the high school. But I mean, I had a high schooler, you know, at Hoggard that did some of this stuff without me, and it wasn't wise. So I just think they need somebody, you know, they need somebody there with them.
So typically what will happen is there will be an incident that will take place. The administrator will then do what's called due process, and due process is when they ask their side of the story. So in their side of the story, they are writing what happened, and then they're able to list witnesses. And so then what happens is the person who is doing the investigation, the administrator, then pulls those individuals that were listed in the due process from the person, and they will go get them and have them write their side of the story. And then after you get all of this paper, then you're looking to see which stories match up. And then if this story, they all match up to exactly what happened, then you're leading forward with, okay, now this is the policy that you have broken. So the policy comes from the board. Mm-hmm. And in the behavior, then they find, okay, where is it that in the student handbook, what violation was it? And then it gives them the opportunity to say 3 to 5 or, 0 to 10, whatever it is, the opportunity. So then they're discussing it with the individual and saying, this is the rule, policy that you've broken. This is the consequence that resides in that. Then there's a call to the parents to let the parents know. Your child has violated da-da-da. I have the due process. Some parents will say, I want a copy of that. You redact the names. You staple it, and it's like, I can either email that to you, I can put it in the mail for you, or if you'd like to pick it up. And we offer those times. At any time, if the parent, when you're talking with them, are saying, so go back over this with me. Typically, you go back over it. This is what's happened. You read what's in front of you. And then the parent will say, I want to see it. And they say, well, I'm going to go home. I'm going to talk with this about my child. They're going to come back. You're going to go back to, this is what I had in front of me. And if there's information that's brought forth, there are times where they go back on their word and they provide information that wasn't brought forth during the investigation. That's all considered. But if you say that every time you bring someone in because sometimes you don't know it's going to be a suspension. It doesn't always, it's like that may be, okay, maybe that warrants in-school suspension. But then things may happen. It may be in your office and someone then gets up, pushes everything off your desk. And then you say, okay, I can't do anything until your parent gets here. Or they may say, you know what, someone has to restrain the person from jumping on the person. And you say, well, I can't do anything until the parent gets here. I understand what individuals are saying that they would love, but I think it's taken out of context when individuals are saying that a child may not feel suited to have a conversation. I don't know that we would be able to get everyone in to have a conversation with every time that a child has to be sent to alternative, or maybe alternative meaning at home. You can't come back for, these 3 days. So what do we do if they don't come? And I'm not asking you, I'm not looking specifically for, the parent, they don't come. If they don't come, so then can you not move forward with the suspension? If they are saying that I can't get there until 6:00 p.m., are we expecting the school staff to wait? Because what I would expect is that school leaders are picking up the telephone and they're calling parents, and you're getting contact, or you've made attempts to make contact. There are oftentimes where the number has changed. They don't call you back. They're at work. But I would want to know that there was contact made with an adult. And those are just, I think, probably tip of the iceberg. I'm sure that other administrators, we have two
Right, I was
administrators
gonna say,
here.
not to put them on the spot, but we do have an elementary and a middle school. And also looking down to Ms. Bradford on D, notice to parent and guardian. This kind of echoes what Dr. Faust is saying that should be happening as far as the due process and the giving the notice. And so, how are you guys feeling after hearing the story and hearing the concern? Where are you landing on this, and what kind of feedback can you give to us?
All right. Well, thank you. I think that the age of the student has a big piece to play in this as well too. But I do agree wholeheartedly with everything that Dr. Faust said. My experience as a secondary high school and middle school principal, both settings. There are situations where, the suspension is under 10 days, where through the process of the investigation, it's determined that an out-of-school suspension is necessary. And you look at some of our high schools, most of our high schools, they're all 2,000 students or 1,500 students, which is a lot of kids. And so I think that making it a mandate that a parent has to be present prior to a short-term suspension is really going to slow down a lot of procedural processes for school administration. With that being said, I think that there's a lot that can take place through the investigation, through that due process. I think that having a formal process of when a situation is brought to administration, a disciplinary infraction, that they do have the due process fully intact, and it is followed each time with the statement from the student, getting witness names, getting witness statements, so that when you do make that phone call to a parent, you have the information in front of you. You want to be able to, if you've made a decision with a parent, and keep in mind that I am a parent of 3 students in New Hanover County Schools as well too, so I'd like to do my due diligence before I make that phone call and be able to say to the parent, I've heard from your student, I've interviewed every witness that they've provided with me, based off board policy, the infraction of board policy, such and such, the suspension will be 2 days. And I typically will end the conversation with something along the lines of, if, your child brings something to your attention this evening that is different than what they've told me, please call me in the morning. One thing that I've always, I think it goes back to building relationships with parents and having that conversation. You have to make the difficult decision. No parent wants to hear that their child's being suspended out of school, and no administrator wants students to be out of school, right? We all want our kids in school each day learning, but there are disciplinary infractions that require short-term suspension. In an effort to build relationships, administrators can use other tactics as well too. Sometimes where you don't get a hold of a parent, you can always come off of a suspension. I might suspend a child for 3 days. That child might go home. That parent might call me in the morning and say, listen, I had a wonderful meeting with my child. They know they're in the wrong. They've never been in trouble before. Can we come meet with you? They come meet. I know that the parent and the school are on the same page. Then anytime you have a situation like that where there's some connection between the house and the school, you can come off of the suspension. You can say, okay, let's bring them back today. Let's bring them back. I feel really good about this conversation. So there's a lot of tactics that can be used, but it's about following the due process, following the process you have in place for investigation, and then communicating with the House. But I do firmly believe that if we say that if as a school principal, I can't short-term suspend a child unless the parent is present in my office, it's really going to slow things down. And not that I want to expedite short-term suspensions, but I do believe that I think that there's processes that can take place that don't require a mandate of having a parent present, if that made sense.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question at this point? B talks about emergency suspension, and it's short-term, and then C is suspension, but it doesn't say short-term or long-term. So can we separate those two things out? So it reads more clearly. Is this a misunderstanding on the public's part?
I think so.
And so can we make this more reflective of what actually happens in the disciplinary practices? Because to me, reading it, I don't see the difference. Well, it does say short-term right there under CA.
But it should possibly.
And committee members, I'd be happy to weigh in on that. So section B speaks to the pre-suspension rights of the student. So
B
those
or
are the
D?
things
A
that
should
must
be A.
happen
A.
before. Is it A? Sorry, I'm looking at maybe the wrong one. Right, sorry, A.
Except in the
A
services.
speaks to the pre-suspension rights of a student. So these are the processes that must be followed before the student is suspended. C speaks to the student's rights during the suspension. In other words, the suspension has been imposed, the student is at home, and these are the student's rights during that time period, whether it's 1, 2, or 10 days.
Maybe it just needs to be wording, though.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that we're talking about two different things, because the pre-suspension rights talks to the due diligence, right? Or the due process. And then B, I mean, there's nothing wrong with adding a line that says a parent must be present, but that's what we do anyway, so there's nothing wrong with adding that, right? Would it say a parent or guardian present, because if you look at it to make sure that it follows the right grammar, must be provided with the following: a parent or guardian present at the meeting or appeal, and that's where we're talking about suspension. But
Well, that would be a significant change. So
It would?
if
Okay.
the committees, I guess it depends on what the committee intends with this language. If it's to ensure and require that a parent or guardian is present during the hearing described in section A before a short-term suspension is imposed, then that would be a very big change in terms of your day-to-day, on the ground processes as described by Dr. Faust and the
okay.
principal who spoke. I apologize for forgetting the name. And it would be different than statute. So a lot of this is driven by statute. And under the statute, students do not have a right to having a parent present during the informal hearing, which is really just the process that the Dr. Faust described, right? The meeting with the student, asking, for their side of the story, asking for witnesses, and doing that investigation work. And there's also no right under the statute to an appeal of a short-term suspension. So if the committee is going to consider a change like this, it's different than statute, and I would strongly encourage further review and refinement of the language itself, just to think through all the procedural issues that it might raise. But to the point that everyone else has spoken to, there's certainly notice, and the notice under section D largely follows the notice requirements under the statute. And the new Hanover County notice requirements actually go a step further in that on the last page of the policy under section D, the first, second, third paragraph states that a student will not be suspended prior to the end of the regular school day when reasonable efforts to contact the parents fail. That goes above and beyond statute. The way I read that, it means you're not sending a kid home during the day if you haven't been able to contact the parents, which maybe Dr. Faust can speak to that, or the principal. But that goes a bit beyond what the statute requires.
So what he means there is you can't get in contact with a parent, but you go ahead and send them home, meaning that during the day and they walk home. That's not allowed. But it's also in letter D as in dog, the notice to the parent, states that an informal conference, if requested, should be held as soon as practical. So it's in there, which means that a parent can come, you call, you say, student is going to be suspended for 3 days, and you share what happened. They may say that I'm coming in to get them in the next 50 minutes. And there's a conference that takes place. That's an informal conference. Or I will be there in the morning. I can get there at 7:30. Would you be able to meet with me at that time? That's the conference time. So you're never negating an opportunity to have a conference with the parent. So it's in there. It's their right. Again, I'm not going to go back over what he was saying, what we were saying before. I've just seen it on sometimes where, not that this would ever happen here, that sometimes during that pre-hearing, the witnesses are sometimes interviewed by the parent, and you're having to separate everyone, and you're not wanting them to see who's there, because then it's like you've got to get their parent involved. And so then you have a huge, and we don't mediate parents. And that sometimes does happen because tempers tend to rise. And not that it would ever happen here, but I've seen that happen before. And
So I'll circle back around to finish this conversation. So looking at the second to last paragraph, the last sentence, a student will not be suspended prior to the end of the regular school day when reasonable efforts to contact the parents fail, except in an emergency situation. So what this is saying is we are making efforts to interact with parents and not just contact. So I don't know if we can add contact or consult with parents, like a physical meeting, I don't know. I mean, contact, it could be phone or meeting, in my opinion, interpretation. But from what I'm gathering, Ms. Bradford, the conversation that we had of what you wanted to see in this policy, it looks like that is the intent of that last sentence, if I'm interpreting everything correctly. Did you have a question?
I just think there's some misunderstanding. But since we have another principal here, and this is age appropriate, I'd love to hear your opinion too.
So I agree with everything that Mr. Madden said. I think when I see that, I see all of the unintended consequences that would come from that. Like Dr. Faust was just saying, and it doesn't really matter whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school. If you've got two kids that have been involved in an altercation and we've got the kids separated, but then we bring the parents in, now we've got kids and parents, and like Dr. Faust said, tempers flaring. I just see that being a recipe for disaster for administrators. I also think that a lot of our discipline is handled by assistant principals and principals, and we don't necessarily have the personnel to keep up with all of those meetings if we have to base all of our decision making on somebody else's schedule and somebody else's calendar because we're waiting for parents to get to our building to have those meetings. From the elementary perspective, we don't do suspensions, right? Unless it's seriously extenuating circumstances, and then not until they're in 4th or 5th grade. But we have relationships with our parents and we have relationships with our students. So the instances where kids don't feel comfortable, that really should not happen. I mean, we work really hard to know our students, and I think that's all at all levels. And our obligation is to the students and to those relationships and to making sure that everybody is safe and everybody's comfortable and everybody's able to have access to best quality instruction. And so I would hope that that 99.9% of our students don't feel like they can't speak for themselves, or that the school is out to get them, because that should not be the case.
I'm fine with taking num 5 back out. I mean, but that was all this was on here for, right? Was clarification, so I'm fine just letting it go.
I mean, my only other last thought to add with this before we move on would be, because it says reasonable efforts. I wonder if putting in at least 3 attempts or something like that, so we can understand what reasonable efforts mean. And I hear what you're saying with understanding what that looks like. But just thoughts of that, if we need to have a minimum standard for you guys to at least try for.
So I would, because we don't know what the principals, how they're attempting to reach out, but I don't think I'm going to say just by the morals of being a school leader, having been a school leader, leaving messages on all of the contact lists when you're trying to find someone. And then now you have the opportunity to send emails, and they may have text. I just wouldn't believe that. It would be hard for me as an educator to believe that no one would ever try to reach out to a parent. And if we were to find out that they weren't, then that would be a personnel issue. So I would say, and I'll stick my neck out on the ledge for principals and administrators when attempting to contact a parent. And even in the fact, and I just want people to hear this, at the elementary level, I've been that principal where the kid is distraught and they're crying. You just don't keep going in and asking questions. You turn into, you are an adult, you're a human too, so you give them the tissue, you stop them, say, who would you like to share it with your teacher? Would you like to share it with the counselor? Who can help? Who would you like to talk with? And the thing is, all you're trying to do is get the information out to say, and then you allow them to get themselves together. They go to a separate place. It's not, I've got to get this done right now. Sometimes it's let me go get your lunch for you. You're going to eat your lunch in here. I think this gloom and doom, fire and brimstone that goes on, I think that's a picture that it doesn't happen. If there's a time where it's like a little more chaotic, things may look, but everyone is trying to de-escalate. And in that time to de-escalate, you do then reach out and say, at the end of the day, I'm calling the parent again, trying to let them know, because your goal is to let them know that you don't want the kid to get on the bus the next morning and they show up at the building. And sometimes people do put them back on the bus, and they show up and you're in your office and you're like, I need you to come get them. We talked yesterday. And so and then you even work out deals with that. It's like, well, I can't do it today. It's like, okay, you can't do it today, but he's going to stay here today in school suspension, but tomorrow he has X amount of days, or she has X amount of days. There is back and forth communication.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that, I Second.
I don't think we have to make a motion. We just drop the discussion. You don't have to motion to take out something that you put in.
7820, Dr. Faust, you had asked this.
I wanted to talk about personnel policy more so on the side of number 8. Let me make sure. A is an Apple, records maintained, and then any request to the State Board of Education to revoke the employee's teaching license. So when this happens, there are statutes that we have to follow in an effort to ensure that we are aligned with what the statute says. There are only particulars that we can recommend, and we send that to the state. And on any given occasion, if someone violates those 3 opportunities, then what we do is we submit documentation. We do give due process, and at the end, if we find that statute was violated, we submit information to the state for revoking their their professional license. And so there's never an opportunity where an individual violates the general statute, and we don't, since I've been here, that we don't submit documentation to the state to revoke.
And you touched on it, and I know there's actually a policy later that we're going to be discussing with the substantial changes, 4240, but I know this is something with the history of New Hanover County that there's a lot of people who are very passionate about. So what you're saying is, under any circumstance that we are allowed to submit a person who violates and meets the criteria for license to be revoked, they are indeed being sent to the state to have their license revoked.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to reiterate.
When they violate state statute.
And just for some more clarity to the public, I know that there is some revisions undergoing. It did meet the crossover. Crossover date was May 4th of potentially making those changes to have more protocols in which is justifiable for license removal. So that has not been finalized, but that's something that we're keeping our eye on. But I appreciate you asking about that. And then looking at, I think there was just some general statute changes addition to this policy.
I don't see it unless it's the references to the GA.
I don't think this was one of the policies that was on our list.
I think Dr. Faust just.
Dr. Faust just wanted to discuss it, so there's nothing we need to do about it. We just discussed.
All right.
Well, there is a couple of these, the blue edits, so we'll need to bring this forward to the board.
Those are
Those
just hyperlinks. That's
Okay,
why it's
okay.
blue.
Brings us on to policy 2120.
Okay.
The Code of Ethics.
Madam Chair, I have something to add to that, but I think we should start at the red and move down.
Okay. So 2120, you see in red are the suggested changes from NCSBA, which I think we agreed to last time. The two that I had added to this is 23 and 24, to not seek individual retaliation of other board members' motives for personal reasons, i.e. religious and or political. And then 24, to understand our role and to not overstep as a board member, a chairperson liaison, or chairperson, and that should be a comma, liaison, or an appointee to subcommittees. With that, so where were you thinking that you have something to add, Ms. Bradford?
Okay, so we've come down through all the way to the end where it says all newly elected board members. I'd like to insert a paragraph there. Because this is Code of Ethics. This is talking about how we're going to conduct ourselves. And it's great to say, I want you to do this, or we agree to do this, but there is no consequence when we violate these things. So I gave to Anita so she can put it up on the screen, but it would read this way. The chairperson has the right to openly address a board member violation of this Code of Ethics for school board members and give them an opportunity of a formal apology. And upon a majority vote of board members, that a board member has committed a violation of this Code of Ethics for school board members, the board member should be removed from committee assignments for a period of 90 days for a first infraction, 180 days for a second infraction, and the remainder of the year for a third infraction. So we're agreeing to these policy Code of Ethics, but we're putting teeth on it if it gets violated. And
Well, I mean, I appreciate you talking in the hypothetical, but the reality is, unfortunately, we have seen violations of this Code of Ethics policy, and so I appreciate you bringing forth a suggestion of accountability, because we need to act together collectively of this whole board. We have varying difference of opinions. However, we're working for the common good for our students and for our faculty. Ms. Crable, do you have?
Yeah, having seen this for the first time, that is a mouthful. That this kind of also speaks to what she's talking about, is that different committee members talk without including other people in the discussion. But there is a recourse that the board can censure another board, and the whole board has to agree to that. It's not the board chair doesn't get to be the board chair dictator. So I don't like anything that says the board chair gets to do that, because that's not what our board is all about. And just to kind of recall, at our very first meeting that we had in the board retreat, I brought forth board norms, and we all agreed to board norms. So that is what, the only person that did not, there was one person who did not agree, and she's raising her hand so I can say it out loud, without being in jeopardy of having the board chair call me up and tell me that I'm on suspension. So I just think some of this is that we have to check ourselves. And some of this it was kind of back to, it's like making a checklist so that we can have an I gotcha. And that's not what we're all about. One of the things that I was talking about for board training is maybe we need board training on how to work better with each other. But to just put in checklists of how we're going to get you, it's all the same things that we're saying that we don't want our principals to be subjected to. Like, let's give them a checklist and say, if you don't follow this, then you're in trouble. So I just think it's not necessary for us to do that when we already have board norms to do that. Or we would have, before this policy would be changed, we'd have to go back and relook at our board norms. This, I think, is an overreach.
And committee members, if I may, just looking at this for the first time, from the legal perspective, with, consequences for elected officials are complicated. There are often, First Amendment issues at play, even when a board censures one of its members. If a board takes the extraordinary step of trying to remove one of its members under the A motion process, that certainly always triggers, the potential for legal action. And even in those situations, there's, some minimal amount of due process that's required before the consequences imposed, whether that's some sort of hearing like I know you all are familiar with, or at least, 4 of you are familiar with, for the censure process. And I would certainly encourage, this is something that the committee and the board wants to consider, that there be further review and consultation with legal counsel, whether that's, myself or our firm or your future legal counsel, before putting something like this in place.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Speaking to accountability, and this is all this is just accountability. The previous board had a real problem with a board member, and so they censured her, and it made no difference whatsoever. In fact, it got worse after that. So I don't think the formal censure process was effective in any way, shape, or form. It turned our board into a crazy clown show, and I really don't want to go down that road. We have to, the board norms are not being followed. That's why I voted against them. Showing up on time, that's a pretty normal thing. If you're going to be elected to office, you should show up on time. Anyway, that's why I voted against them, because I didn't think that they would be followed, and they haven't been followed. This code of ethics came to us from the school board association, and it's telling us how we're supposed to act, but there is no accountability if we don't act this way. And you're elected, so you can't be taken out of office. If you're appointed to something, say, a trustee for a community college, you can be removed. But in our instance, since we're elected by the people, we cannot be removed. So the only way to hold accountable is in some way, shape, or form like this. And I really think it's desperately needed before we turn into a crazy clown show. And we're here to do the business of the board. We're here to do the business of the school district. We're not here for personal political platforms. We're not here to disparage people. We're not here for that stuff. And so we have to have some accountability. And nobody's in danger of this if they just follow the board norms, and they follow just normal, polite conduct. So again, I've made a motion. Ms. Barnhart, did you second and I missed it?
I think I missed your
If I
motion.
can just offer another clarification. So there is, just to correct, so there is a process for removal from office for members of local boards of education, and there's also a policy for it. It's policy 2116, removal from office, and it's driven by, again, by statute. There's individuals who have committed felonies, corruption, malpractice, board members who willfully or corruptly omit, neglect, or refuse to discharge their duties. So I did just want to offer that up, that there is a process captured in your policy and statute.
Thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
So I do want to just call attention to the fact that this policy we did get from NCSBA, but the suggestions were just making sure that we didn't have spouses employed. So just so that anybody who's following along and reading, it says adds reference to new, stating that board members will not influence any personnel matter pertaining to the board member's spouse of employment with the school system, and should be added to your policy only if the board adopts the applicable 2121. So that is what the NCSBA is recommending to us. And I will stand by the fact that by removing a board member's ability to voice their opinion, either through Robert's Rules of Order and objecting to somebody who makes a motion that you don't like, or taking them off of a committee because you feel, and limiting their ability to influence others on the whole entire board, I don't think that's what a school board is meant to be. We're a body of 7, and we have to all get along, 7 different personalities, and one way to make that better is to go through some, board training on working together. And so I cannot support removing a board member and giving them restrictions to do their job as an elected official.
I appreciate both sides of this. I am wholeheartedly in agreement with the red and the blue changes, and I definitely think that Ms. Bradford's suggestion needs to come before the board to have an open discussion, because what has happened is on the dais, there has been personal attacks on multiple times by multiple different board members with the new incoming board members and old ones, and we need to stop this. And if there needs to be consequences in order for that to happen, then I'm fine with openly having the discussion, because we need to be acting like adults, and I believe that you are correct in saying that, and actually doing our job. So I would like to move this forward with the suggested changes so that we can have the open conversation with the board. And I'll make a motion for that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes, I'm
Okay,
opposed.
that passes, 21-20. Next up is graduation requirements, and the suggested changes you can see are in red from NCSBA. I also wanted to make note that there is some potential changes on the state level as well for different credits and electives, so depending on what passes through this session, there might have to be changes with this policy as well. But I am fine with the changes that are suggested. I did have one question. I was curious why we have such a different discrepancy, and the state requirements being 22 and our local requirements are 28. So if somebody would love to speak to that, so just for my own clarity.
I had the same concern.
Ms. Barnum, I'm being told that's you.
So it is the board's discretion to have a more rigorous graduation requirement. And the first paragraph of this policy really kind of lays that out, saying that the board recognizes the importance of setting rigorous graduation requirements to help ensure that students are many words, aren't most career and college ready. And that's where the board determined to add 6 additional electives for that reason. And it's also pretty common among the higher performing districts to do so. It makes our students much more employable, and it also makes our students much more competitive in college admissions.
Yeah, and I was just going to reiterate that is, are we a school district that wants to be average or just there, or do we want to be a school district that better prepares our students to be lifelong learners and successful in their post-high school endeavors? So, yeah, I don't think it would be wise for us to take away our high standards.
I was just asking for clarity with that, so I was not actually suggesting a changes. I do think that we, having higher requirements is a good thing. However, knowing that we have some students that struggle, that is also a concern. To say if the state is requiring 22 to have a quality high school diploma, and we have students who are at 22 who can make it at 22, they can still be successful after high school without having 28. And so that's where my question becomes the justification. I understand the high achieving, but if you're saying a student who's already struggling and the state is saying 22 is what we need, but we're saying 28 to a child who's struggling, you can understand my concern for children of the dropout rate. I mean, when we're talking, we want kids to see a successful high school graduation. That's where my question came into play, not because I'm mad that we're giving opportunities for our higher learners.
Yep, and I want to offer a clarification as well. In the last section of the policy, the final section, under special circumstances, there is the reduced credit diploma option. It's not really a different type of diploma. It's the reduced credit option. And we, the board approved regulation around the reduced credit elective process. And this year, I've processed 102 reduced elective credits for graduates in this cohort that have special documented circumstances, whether they've transferred to many schools, whether they were previously dropout and we recovered them, whether there's health or mental health concerns. And so those students, we have a process for supporting them in their graduation if the higher rigor doesn't work for their situation.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, Madam Chair. I have personal experience with that with the child, and we need to get her out of the county, and she graduated with the less credit, so it works really well. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. And so I'm fine with moving this forward in the board in the top left column, 3460. Second.
Can I just, before we get too much farther along, in the cleanup table, it says that if you're adopting the changes to policy 2120, then we need to look at policy 2121 to make sure that we revise the last sentence in the first numbered provision to clarify that a board member will not influence personnel matters pertaining to a board member's spouse. So it says further on down.
I'll make a note to add that. It's policy 2121.
Yeah.
I'll make a note to add that to our June policy for discussion with that. The next policy up is 4050, which is children of military families. And again, I did not have any, I support these changes as is, so I did not have any other feedback.
Same here.
Ms. Crable, did you have
No, I'm
anything?
good.
Okay. So then I'm going to make a motion to go ahead and move that forward to the board in the top left column, 4050. That brings us to the next policy, which is the age requirements for initial entry, policy 4100. And again, this is a lot of reference with the children of military families. I am fine with and comfortable with these changes and moving forward to the June board meeting.
I as well.
Yes.
Okay. Next up, this is immunization and health requirements for school admission, policy 4110. It's mine. Yes, ma'am.
I have some issues here.
Okay, I'm going to let you have the floor.
All right. Let me find it. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Immunization, A, 1, requirements for initial entry, J. Any other vaccine as may be required by law or regulation. I'd like to see that struck. After what we just went through, I think we need to strike that.
Yeah, so in looking at this, we adopted this policy May 4th, 2021, and it got revised November 2022. And so do we not have an immunization and health policy in place until during COVID, or did we have one, it just was a different name format?
We've always had one.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did. This is a requirement under state law. We did have that, but the policy manual went through a complete change, and so the numbers changed, and so this was a new policy. At that point, it was not a policy amendment, but yes, we have had immunization requirements.
Thank you for that clarification, because I remember it going through a first and second reading, and so I was confused why we wouldn't have one, and then, anyway.
And then also just to clarify, Jay is listed in there, and I'm sure that Jason can jump in as well. Jay is listed there to ensure that we are not, that if law changes, either a federal regulation or a state law changes, and there's an additional vaccine that's required, that we would not be out of compliance by not having it specifically listed.
And that's correct. And the school boards actually do not have the authority to add or change this list. The Commission for Public Health has that authority. So even throughout the pandemic, I know there was a lot of discussion and debate in many school districts about requirements for COVID-19 vaccines. And it was always my firm's guidance that boards did not have the independent authority to require that. It's the Commission for Public Health, which is part of DHHS. And if the committee and the board were to remove J, it doesn't change on a practical level if law or regulation, for example, the Commission for Public Health or some other statute requires an additional immunization other than the ones listed here, it would be required anyway.
And
Ms. Barnhart,
yes, ma'am.
It doesn't show up in red anywhere, and I'm not quite certain why, but the table tells us that the only suggested change from the NCSBA is the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine to the list of vaccines, letter I. So that should probably have been, or actually, we're kind of behind on this, so we probably, by the time we got to it, they'd already updated it, so never mind.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, going back to Jay, when Ms. Varnum was speaking, she talked about federal regulation. I just remember that the local health department with eye doctors and veterinarians and only one medical doctor on it, put this whole county under masks, and it was just a nightmare. And, looking back, we can all armchair quarterback it, but I'm not going to vote for anything that allows a general vaccination. I'm just not going there. I am way too raw from what we just came through too, and I know that parents and the members of the community are to vote to have that in anything. I'm sorry.
Jason, as far as legal standing, if that was omitted, Ms. Varnum had referenced that potentially not being in compliance, if not, but having the current required vaccination schedule is available and it has that listed.
Right. So North Carolina law requires children to receive the listed vaccines in order to attend. And if students do not have the vaccines, then they cannot attend. So if the committee would like to remove letter J, which is a catch-all, I believe the committee could do that. It just would not have any practical impact on any future changes in law or regulation. And again, these would not be changes that a Board of Education could make itself. In our opinion, boards of education do not have the authority to add or make changes to this list. That's the Commission for Public Health, which is part of NCDHHS.
Thank you for clarity. So in the event that there are immunizations that are added, we would just, rather than having this catch-all J, we would have a specific letter add, is what I take from what you're saying. And the other thing I want to,
Julie's got a comment.
yes, ma'am.
I was just going to mention that also based on what Jason is describing, if another immunization is added by state requirements, then we will automatically be in compliance with that. It's just that the policy will look different. So we will have to comply with that higher level authority than the policy. So just to clarify.
Right. And also just from the practical perspective, again, if something gets added, the NCSBA, I'm sure they would, eventually update this policy to add the new vaccine. J is a catch-all, for the in-between period. And then it really becomes a question of how to communicate that to your parents. If there's not this catch-all and there's something new, then, you can't point to your policy. You'd have to point to something else.
I'm willing to do that. I don't think we need a catch-all.
And I also want to point out on it's page 63 of our packet, but it's page 2 in the policy, because this became a debate during the pandemic as well. But New Hanover County, and look at number 3, little c, exemptions to immunization requirements may be only made for religious reasons, for medical reasons approved by physician pursuant to state law. So I just want to say that's part of being in compliance for us, that we actually do allow that. So that was something that, hot debate topic, but I'm just going to bring that to the forefront. And so I'm fine, I think, with keeping it in the certificate of immunization, but just knowing that it's there. So in the event, after the conversation, I am fine with striking J and the acknowledgement that if and when there are additional vaccines, that we would have to list them out to be added.
Yes, and that schools will be complying automatically, whether it's added to policy or not.
Yes.
So, Madam Chair, you're not allowed to just say you're fine with it. We need to take a vote to move it along.
Any other discussion for this policy? Okay, well then I would be fine with making those changes, and I make a motion to move this forward to the June board meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay. That brings us to policy 4130, discretionary admissions. And I believe, Ms. Farnham, we made an update to this, so I just want, as your eyes are looking over this, if you want to make sure that the update that the board had approved is added in addition to the adds from the NCSBA suggestions. And I think it is, but. And I am fine with the changes that are suggested, so I make a motion to move this forward too.
I have a question. So which of these reds are ours and which of these reds are the NCSBA? And same with the blue? Because when we hover over, we can't tell. Specifically in 4130, the lines, all discretionary admissions will be made, blah, blah, blah.
The text in red, those are the NCSBA changes.
Okay.
The text in blue, those are the changes that this committee and the board previously approved. It's just identified for clarity.
I see just one bit of blue, A2, right? Am I missing something? It's very small.
Yeah, it's page 66, it's page 1 of our policy at the very bottom, to other admissions. And that was something that we voted on last policy meeting to bring forward to the board. The board has already approved this, so this is something that is already in our current policy, but we just, yes.
That's correct.
Thank you, Jason. I make a motion to move this forward with the changes that are shown to the board in the June meeting, to the June board meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And goes to 4155, assignment to classes.
We're gonna,
I'm also comfortable with the changes that are shown. Any discussion for this one?
if that was a motion, I would second it.
Okay, I was like, I make a motion to move this to the June board meeting. Second by Ms. Bradford. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Now we move on to 2220, Student Insurance Program.
Boo, I'm out of order.
I'll give you a second.
What page is that?
It's on page 73 of our today packet.
I do have a comment related to this one.
Ms. Sutton, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, got it.
On page 73 of our document, under section C, where it talks about catastrophic insurance,
Oh, yeah.
it references that the board will purchase insurance to cover students and school system employees. And currently, we are not purchasing additional insurance to cover our employees because this is covered under our workers' comp 100%. So there would be no need to have the additional insurance.
So are you making a suggestion to strike?
Yes,
The
I'm
whole
making a
last paragraph?
suggestion to strike out school system employees.
And Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Of Ms. Sutton?
Yes, ma'am.
Talk to me about what catastrophic insurance is. I have a preconceived notion, so I need to know what that means in terms of this.
So this would be a more risky situation, so maybe football, I think, was an example that was used in here, or it could be some other type of sport where something happens where we need additional insurance that isn't covered under our regular student athlete insurance policy. And I can send someone an email and get some specific examples if that's helpful for you.
Is this in
I don't have
reaction to that student getting hit in the face with volleyball?
No, we've had this insurance for many years.
But it's catastrophic injury?
Right.
Okay, because the word injury isn't in there. So catastrophic for me is like a hurricane wipes out a bunch of schools, or, plague comes through.
Right, but this is specific to athletic events.
Okay.
Like somebody becomes
Yeah, it
a
is under athletics.
quadriplegic,
Well,
or
Right.
because of that, or
A severe injury
yeah.
that would not be something
Brain
normally
injury.
covered.
okay.
And committee members, so this provision was inserted and added by the NCSBA to ensure compliance with a new statutory requirement. That was part of a law passed in 2021. So that law requires all schools that participate in high school interscholastic athletics, they shall purchase catastrophic insurance for high school athletic activities, and that insurance must be purchased for students or school personnel participating in or responsible for supervising the activities. So I heard there was a proposal to strike staff, school system employees from this language. If you were to do that, that might not be consistent with the statute. I hear what Ms. Sutton is saying, that they're covered under workers' comp. But I think that change would require additional study to make sure that the workers' comp coverage would, that it's appropriate to substitute for the catastrophic insurance coverage. And that could be through conversations between staff and NCDPI, or I'd certainly be happy to assist with that.
If it's okay with the board, I would like to look in that in a little bit further, because my understanding is that we were covered through the workers' comp. So.
And this language too, so this addition is strongly recommended by the NCSBA, meaning that this is a statutory requirement. Boards of education shall purchase catastrophic insurance to cover these things. It's not required in the sense that it must be included in your board policy. So this is something that, if the committee wanted to hold this for further study and discuss further at the June meeting, you could certainly do that. The underlying statutory obligation remains, but
Right.
I'm saying not
I'll
required
make
today
a
to approve
motion
it.
to go ahead and keep this policy held in committee, policy 4220. And we'll circle back around to looking into that. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. The next policy is 4240/7312. And this kind of goes, I know we touched on a little bit earlier, the process of reporting to have state licensure removes and different things. But there was a couple verbiage suggesting changes from the NCSPA. So on the first page, the conduct with or involving a child. But the question I know from the community has been the extra caveat that if in the event Dr. Faust and his team does not utilize due diligence, which he has outlaid the process, that is what happens currently.
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes.
pardon the interruption. I just want to let everybody know we're in shelter in place. It's due to some activity in the neighborhood, but this facility, as well as the entire complex, is in shelter in place.
Cool. Thank you for that announcement.
Some more to be. Darn.
All right. So with that being said, I do want to open the dialogue with this committee. The discussion has been in the event, looking at our policy, if we want to add verbiage, something of the following. I'm not saying this is the exact wordings, but in the event that the district does not submit for a person to have their license removed or revoked after the appeal period, the board would have the ability to make that submission. Indeed. You're ready. I was like,
Where is that in the document? I don't remember reading that.
no, it's not in the document. This has been discussion from the community, so I wanted to get our central office feedback.
4240?
Yes, we are on policy 4240/407312. I will repeat myself, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you. So the discussion in the community with the events that have happened in the past of New Hanover County Schools, in the event that central office does not do their job and submit license removal to the state, could we and do we want to add a caveat that after the due process that the board may have that power to do so? I know there's limitations and there's criteria for what license removal looks like, but I want to turn the floor over to you.
So during closed session, when we're going over personnel, we share with the board a laundry list of things that may or take place. And so there's never an opportunity when we go through what has taken place during that session that can't be discussed. And just because it's not discussed at the dais does not mean that the board never has an opportunity to ask questions about what was done or what needs to be done, what is the maximum limit that we can go. So honestly, if you want to just satisfy the community, but what I want everyone to understand is that when that happens, there's attorneys that are there are HR personnel that's there, there's the superintendent that's there's the board that's there, that's all hearing this, and the steps are laid out as to what has to take place. And so I honestly understand the mistrust. But it's almost like, and I'm going to use this, and this is probably bad, it's almost like you have the bad boyfriend and now you have the other one, and we're being held accountable for what the bad boyfriend did. And that ruins a relationship because we never get the opportunity to show, not that you've ever done this, that's not what I'm saying. There has not been a time when reporting needed to take place or suspension needed to take place that the board wasn't aware. And so when we are doing board business off of the dais, but in a closed session, we're making you aware of what's taking place in the district. The board business that takes place up here is what we can share. But behind closed doors, because there are personnel issues, we have to, one, be in lockstep with what legal parameters can and can't take place behind closed doors. And in the event that it comes to the point where the board has to do a hearing, then of course we are a little more close-lipped with it. But we are also sitting on the other side waiting to, and we'll use the words defend what steps were taken. Because just as we explained earlier with the due process, it actually works the same way with an employee. They come in, they do their side of the story, they can have representation before we move forward. So that scenario that I gave for students actually works the same with the adults. Sometimes it may get a little more detailed in there, but just understand that if the board is aware of what steps need to be taken, the board doesn't have to, it can be in writing, and it has been in writing. I mean, general statute is there. And you have legal. So I want a clean understanding for everyone to know that when someone does something wrong, by no means does this leadership stand up for it and support wrongdoing on any side of it. And I know it's not comfortable, but we have to do what's right, not only when people are watching, but even when they're not watching.
With that, Dr. Faust, I'm going to ask you two questions just to provide some transparency and clarity to our public. First, are we allowed to submit license removal whether a person is terminated or they resign?
If it's under that statute.
Okay, so you're saying we can't just submit license to be revoked. It has to meet a certain criteria, is what you're saying.
Yes.
But in that event, it does not matter if a person is terminated with the district or they resign from the district. You have, and your team has the authority to submit for license removal if there was wrongdoing.
If there's wrongdoing and they meet that criteria, that the state statute, and we do.
And yes, ma'am.
Dr. Faust, one of the things I really appreciate you and the team is you're very black and white on wrong and right, and I just love that. But you're right. The community sees you as the new boyfriend, us as the new boyfriend, and how do we overcome that? Would putting some language in here because there's a big mystery about closed session, truthfully. In all my time, I never really knew what was going on in there, other than you were eating because you could smell the food and, you're sitting out here and your stomach is growling. So the public doesn't have a clue what happens in closed session, and we can't really tell them. We can't even tell our best friend or our spouse. So to make them more comfortable, is there something that we could put here that doesn't mess with any statute, that just lets them know that we got their back?
So I think that general statute has been in place for a number of years. And even though it was written at the general statute level, if individuals did not move forward, they just didn't move forward. We have examined and gone back and looked to see. And what I can say is that we have pushed forward more than, and I'll just say we push forward more. And so you can put it in there, but what I don't want people to think is that we're doing it because we're doing it because that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah. And Dr. Faust, if I may, there's a desire to, and board or committee members, I've given extensive attorney-client legal guidance on this question that I won't get into here in open session, but I would just say, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of that in a future closed session as well. I do just want to make a couple of statements. So this, the reporting requirements are governed by state law, state policy, and local board policy. If there is a desire by the board or the committee to have transparency and to essentially, inform the public about those legal requirements and those policy requirements, they're collected in several of your existing board policies. There's board policy 4040, policy 7900, in policy 7930. So I say all that to say, from a legal perspective, there would not necessarily be a need to restate those requirements in this policy 4240, since they're already captured in other board policies. And they're also captured in state board policy, which is policy LICN-007. And that information is obviously public, it's posted, and can be made available if there's a desire to provide transparency and information around the existing legal requirements. The other point I just want to make is, those statutes and policies do not just give the authority to report, there's an obligation to report. And there are serious consequences for administrators who do not report. And those consequences, I believe Ms. Barnhart raised this earlier, may be getting stronger with some existing proposed legislation that would make it a felony for failing to report. So it's a serious obligation, not just authority, with serious consequences.
Thank you for jumping in. I just wanted to have that open dialogue and conversation because I think, like Dr. Faust said, there has been a changeover from the incidents that have happened and the intentional protocols that Dr. Faust and his team are following. I know that because I am part of closed session that I hear about those people that are on notice for different things. And so I just wanted to have an open dialogue with the public to say that it is taking place, it is being seriously looked at, and no tolerance for it. And so with that, I am comfortable with moving forward with the suggested changes to NCSBA 4240/7312.
Josie, I have a couple comments.
Yes, ma'am.
So in paragraph 2, I just wanted clarification on this. If you look about halfway down where it says, by contrast, suspected child maltreatment by a caregiver in a child care facility, including a licensed preschool and other classroom things, must be reported to the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. And so is that the state, or is that us locally?
That's the state.
Okay, and I bring that up because at the local level, we don't call it DHS anymore. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that. Let's see.
What page was that on, Ms. Grable?
It was the first page. Yeah, it was in the, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that we weren't doing that. And then, so this, I just had a question about this in, it's letter E, page 3 of the policy. So, and I'm looking at number 1, where it says the principal may establish a contact person in the school to act as a liaison with the state and local agencies charged with investigating reports. Is that something that we do? Or is that, like, do we leave that kind of stuff to the central office? No, it just says the principal may establish a contact person in the school to act as a liaison with state and local agencies charged with investigating reports made pursuant to this. I'm just wondering if that is what if the principals do that, or if you do that.
So it would depend if they're talking specifically about calling DHHS and reporting, that can be done at the school. So then whomever has reported it would follow up.
Okay.
It may not even be the principal who actually reports it.
Okay.
But sometimes the individual who reports it may share. They don't actually have to share with the principal that they have done so. They can do it anonymously.
So is that why it says the principal may establish, if I saw it, then would I pick up the phone and call, or would I call my principal and say, please report with me?
Yeah.
Everybody does.
Okay.
And to clarify,
So,
when,
yes, why
when
do
there,
we even need that?
right, when there are local investigations, very often the school social worker is the one that's working with social workers. But when it is a state investigation, such as regarding a child care facility, like our preschool programs, then our preschool staff are involved, the district level staff.
Okay. And then in letter E again, number 3, where we're talking about the law enforcement with the child's parent, blah, blah, blah. Does this affect at all what we just talked about in policy 4351? We didn't do any changing in 4351, so this really doesn't affect anything. Okay. And so then in letter G, when it says, in even-numbered years, the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services will provide child abuse and sex trafficking education, blah, 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 blah. Is that our darkness to light training? Or, as an example?
That we are currently using darkness to light to
Yeah.
accomplish this, yes.
And so, but we do it in non-even years too, just to get everybody caught up, because I think I took it in a non-even year.
Right, we do part of our staff in 1 year and part of the staff in the
Okay.
other year because
We have
of.
too many.
Right,
Well, not too many, we have a lot.
we do, we have a lot, and we want to make sure we provide that training with fidelity.
Okay, just checking on that. And then,
And so
Sorry.
what happens is there is a laundry list of trainings that we give at the beginning of each year. And so individuals are made aware. So therefore, if something happens, we are able to go back and look at the training list
Okay.
to ensure. So that's how we ensure that everyone has been trained. If they hadn't, there's videos and there are things that they can.
Yeah. No, and these are great programs. I just wanted to call that to the attention because we're going to talk about that in board training. So that's just kind of like a foreshadowing of what we're coming up with. And then I have a big box around H. Let me look at that real quick. No, I'm good.
So with that, I'm fine with moving this forward to June board meeting.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. That brings us,
Madam Chair?
yes, that brings us to policy 43.
4,300. There's no way we're going to get through student behavior in 10 and a half minutes.
This is a big one.
So do we just want to dip our toe into it and come back out? Because there's no way we're going to get to it. And if we're free to go at noon, I need to go at noon.
I'm fine with ending because I agree with that.
I kind of want to have a foreshadowing discussion because this is at the heat of everyone's.
You got
mind
10 minutes.
with
Go
student
for it.
safety.
But
I
can we
don't
leave
think
time to
that-
go through this list too, since
Yeah.
we know we're not going to approve it? Can we just do that?
You do the list first.
I mean, the changes from NCSBA, honestly, there's one sentence. Teachers, school-based administrators, parents, and law enforcement will be consulted when existing student behavior policies are revised or new such policies are created. Jason, I did want to ask, is this being added because of a state or law requirement?
Yes, there was a change in statute, I believe last year, that it includes a consultation requirement. So this language, whether it's in there or not, it's required by law.
Well, I guess that's where, I realize my mic's off. I guess that's where my interesting discussion comes on because this policy has been updated a lot. It got updated in March of 2021 and November of 2022. And I looked back at the suggested changes. In March of 2021, we added this. Number 2, a system that ensures the equitable treatment of all students. Then we also added in March of 2021, including, and looking at page 3, letter G, including but not limited to restorative practices. Page 4, referral to a school-based committee as set forth in general statutes, 115C 397.1. And consistent with the severity of the infraction, we added letters P and Q, school work service and disciplinary reassignment. These are all under minor violations. And then we went back and added some different changes. So I think it's very interesting that the language is being added here that now we're going to make everybody aware about policy changes when in the last 2 years we have made very substantial changes in the event, and I brought this up at the board meeting, that we have we have teachers and we have staff who are frustrated with the behaviors, who feel like they are trying to do everything they can, and the result is resulting in a suspension. They're being told, you can't do that anymore. And so I want to have an open dialogue, and I'm just putting it out there so that all of my board members can look into to give feedback about this. But this is very frustrating, and given the event of the safety issues that we've seen in the last few weeks, we cannot tolerate when students make bad choices. There are some times and some instances that have to result in a consequence for the safety of our staff and our students. So I want to be very clear whenever we are establishing protocols. I want to talk about what we are doing proactively and focus on that with the acknowledgement that sometimes is going to result in something we don't want to see, which is ultimately a suspension or expulsion. And so when that happens, it's definitely, I've looked at the behavior matrix and I want to see more feedback. I think it's something that we absolutely have to utilize you guys as principals to say, what are you doing? Tell me what's working, tell me what's didn't, and how can we do it better? How can we do it across the district? How can we share the different things that are working well for our students, and what can we do to support you when it's not working well for a student? And so that is, I understand the time constraint, so I'm going to get off my conversation, but this is where looking at and seeing that, the red line to say, hey, now we're going to talk to about all the changes that are being made, knowing that in the last 2 years we've made substantial changes to behavioral policy without having that caveat, just kind of put me over the ledge when I was looking at this. Yes, sir.
So that may be, well, this is coming from the school board. Those changes could have possibly come from us. So there's no.
Right,
no
so the
and
C,
what
these two came from us.
What, as we're leaving, what I want you to study is the subjective
Disrespect, things like that.
That's where we have to really have a deep conversation. And I think that's, well, I know that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about when an individual brings illegal substance into the building, and a weapon into the building. That's a no, I mean, there's no question at all. It's like, it's very much black and white, as you said. This is what's going to happen. You fight, there's some leeway depending on the principal gets to have that discretion. But what I want people to understand is that in no terms has the district ever told them that they cannot suspend. The board gave a policy that said that you can't suspend. And if you go back, you'll see how we pushed back against it, because there are opportunities and there are times when I'm sorry, but I visit schools and I'm like, what in the world? And at some point, I think we've tied the hands of principals, and then you're hearing this outcry of saying that teachers are tired, they don't know what to do. What we were doing is giving them other resources, and then there are times where you do need to be able to de-escalate and understand when you are escalating as an adult, and having vice versa. And the first trigger you pull can't be you're suspended. It's like, what is it that you have done? When it is subjective, if it is illegal, there are just certain things that you just have to go home, or you are reassigned to a new place. And there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I know they have their due processes in place, and that's good too. But we have to really and truly look and see. Now, I really and truly want us to have a full blown out conversation so that we can give real examples and we can actually pull out or extrapolate data to share with individuals, because we can literally look and tell you what's in Power School.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to wrap us up here and recap what we've talked about. But I know that was the one highlighted things, but you touched on something. You said a board policy tied the hands of our principals, and here we're looking at a policy. So even though this is the suggested changes, when we're looking at and we're reevaluating what is happening here, we need to have an open conversation. And I understand sometimes the intent behind something and the follow through doesn't always work out, but we need to be open about that, because I want us and I want our principals to be focusing on the input, the intentionality of that. And ultimately, if something happens, the safety of our students, if the result is that a child needs to be removed for a reason, then we need to take that into consideration too. So that'll be jumping off in
Madam
June.
Chair?
Yes.
Can I suggest, I don't know that, I mean, this needs to be really all seven of us, almost in a work session, where we dig into this and we revisit what we're doing, what's working,
Okay.
what's not. So I don't know how we go about making that happen, but
We'll contact the chairperson, Wildebohr, and make that suggestion. So I'll make a motion to go ahead and table the remainder of the substantial policies to the June board meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so to recap, we have two policies that didn't require any changes, 4351, 7820, so nothing's going to happen with those. In the top left, which says existing policies for amendment at regular board meeting with no changes, are the following: 3460, 4050, 4100, 4130, 4155, 4240/7312.
Isn't it 4270, or did I write that wrong?
I can double check.
Okay. You're right, it's 4240, I'm sorry, I wrote
It's
it
okay.
wrong.
In the top right corner, existing policies for amendment, it's going to be 2230, 2120, 4110, as well as the universal application process with the updated.
But that's not a policy.
Correct, so
It's
I
part of
don't,
Policy 2230.
but on this little grid, that's going to be because there has to be changes made, so that was the best resort for me to place it in.
It's under Policy 2230, that's where we're addressing it.
Correct. So policies held in committee is 4220. And then I made a note that in the June meeting, we'll be looking at 2221, since we updated 2120. And that is it. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I have one comment.
So
One
moved.
comment before we leave. Is it possible that we get these board packets? I will be happy to drive down and get one, because it does us no good to have this big, thick packet sitting right in front of us if they're different than what we've seen online.
They were not different from what they've seen online, and I was copied
No, I'm just saying.
by the email. I was copied by the email from Ms. Kadetsky that said that the packets were ready, except they were not printed because she was going over the meeting minute adjustments. And so I'm happy to continue to utilize that process. So hopefully the Friday before the next meeting that it's ready to go. But that was the intent behind trying to email out to you ladies to let you know that they were ready to go. There was no changes after that email was sent out to you. So
Okay, I think I missed the email, but thank you.
thank you. With that, everyone have a good day.
Did we vote to adjourn?
Oh. Okay, all in favor of adjournment? Aye. Any opposed? Nope.